Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Benji-Sales live chat. It's so good to be back. It is so good to see everybody. Hello. I am excited for today's episode, y'all. I missed you guys. I was not on last week. I'm sure as many of you know, and that is because I was sick. I got super sick last week, but I am back. It was a bummer to miss last week because there was still a ton of news, a ton of topics to talk about, kind of in the fallout of the whole Microsoft Activision announcement. There was still all the discussion that was going on online about Call of Duty exclusivity and all of that stuff. But I just wasn't able to make it happen. But we're back this week. I'm so excited. And lo and behold, we have a giant news topic that we can talk about today. What is the big news? Well, you all already know, but Sony is going to acquire Bungie, developers of Halo in the past, as well as Destiny, for $3.6 billion. It's really interesting how this deal is structured. It's different than previous PlayStation acquisitions. So we know, in the past they've acquired companies like Bluepoint, like Housemarque, and whenever they did these acquisitions, they went immediately into PlayStation Studios under Herman Hulst, who kind of oversees them, and they're just completely integrated the same way as, let's say, a Naughty Dog is. Bungie is a little bit different because Bungie is actually going to, while they're still technically a PlayStation Studios company, they're actually going to be run independently, and they actually are going to have their own board. And also, I think they're going to report directly to Jim Ryan instead of Herman. So that's really interesting. It says that they can self-publish. It says that they basically have complete creative control over what they do. So a really interesting deal here. Much different than what we saw out of Housemarque and Bluepoint. So I'm sure we're going to go way into all of that, what it means, what we might see from Bungie in the future, how this makes sense for PlayStation and Sony, and so much more. Other topics we can talk about. Jim Ryan did a great interview with GamesIndustry.biz where we got a lot of info about kind of the future direction of PlayStation. There's a lot of very interesting comments in there from Jim, talking about taking the business beyond console, talking about how they have a bunch of games as a service and live service games in development. So there's a whole bunch there we can talk about, and so much more. So for anyone, if this is your first time ever as part of my live chat, basically the way this works, it's a stream, it's a show, it's 100% driven by you, your comments, your questions. We basically just break down and chat about the video game industry every week. There's going to be two ways to do that. First of all, of course, there's the free method. You just type a question, whatever you want, it pops into chat, and I get to as many free questions as I possibly can. If you want to guarantee, though, that I get to your question, the way to do that is going to be the super chat option. Type a donation, whatever you want. It alerts me there's a super chat, and I get to super chats immediately. Now, to be clear, don't feel pressured, don't feel obligated to donate into chat. It's just a way to help support me in the channel and make sure that I get to your question. But I do hit tons and tons of free questions as well every week. All right, everybody, I think that's it. I don't think there's any other big housekeeping notes off the top. I was on Xbox Chatterdays on Saturday with Windows Central with Miles. So if you haven't gotten a chance to see that, you can check that out over on, I think it's on the Windows Central YouTube channel. We had a great conversation all about Xbox. So I was on Xbox Chatterdays on Saturday. So you can go check that out on YouTube as well if you didn't catch me there. But I think that's it. I think that's it for housekeeping notes. I'm good to be back, or glad to be back, and we have a ton to talk about. All right, let's get rocking. Is my audio good really quick? Can everybody make sure? Can you just let me know down in the bottom of chat that my audio is okay for the mic? I just want to make sure. Whenever I was on Xbox Chatterdays before we went live, I was having some mic issues. So I just want to make sure you guys can all hear me good. Okay. First, we have several super chats, so let me start getting rocking on those first and foremost. All right, we got Plastic Hearts Podcast kicking it off here with a 20. Holy cow, Plastic Hearts Podcast. That is incredibly kind of you, incredibly generous, as always, so supportive in chat. Thank you so much, Plastic Hearts. Dropping a 20 here saying, Benji Boy, sorry you got COVID and glad you're back. Thank you so much. Very happy to be back. I won't go super in depth about it, but luckily my COVID was fairly mild, but obviously a huge part of that's going to be because I'm vaccinated. First 2 days were pretty darn rough, but after that, I pretty rapidly, got better. So thank goodness for that. It definitely sucked, but I'm glad to be back and glad that we're good to go now. So Alana Pierce said she thinks Sony is interested in Bungie's tech rather than Destiny itself, as they want to focus on live service as well as single player. Thoughts? All right, before I answer, let me just make sure that people say my mic's okay. It's good. Yep, audio's okay. Sweet. Okay. All right, so audio is good. So to answer your question, so does Alana saying that Sony is more interested in Bungie's tech than Destiny itself? I would say she is partially correct, but not fully, no. So it's going to be a combination of things. Are they definitely interested in the tech and in the know-how of Bungie in terms of like live service games? There's just no doubt about it. Bungie is literally one of the best in the entire industry at having an online service-based game. And as we know, most of PlayStation's first-party studios have little to no experience with that. If you look at a lot of their big players, right? Let's look at Naughty Dog. Have they made online games before? For sure, right? Uncharted 4 had an online mode. The Last of Us had an online mode. But I would say neither one of those were like ultra ambitious games in terms of online components. They were just pretty standard multiplayer in them. Not saying they weren't good or anything. I'm just saying it wasn't some big, giant, long-term service game. You look at Santa Monica, again, they have like really no history of that. You look at Housemarque, no. Blue Point, no. Like you can go down the list. Almost none of Sony's studios are known for having huge online, service offerings. So there's no doubt that bringing Bungie in-house is going to pay massive dividends in terms of what they can teach the other studios about how running these service games work. Not everyone's going to want to make a Destiny game, but there's a lot they could learn just in terms of online structure, the technology behind it, even like how to keep a good cadence of release software coming out for it. So there's a ton they can learn there, and the tech itself. There's no doubt, right? That's absolutely a component of this. But to say, and I don't know, I didn't hear Alana's exact comment, so it could be, a little more nuanced, but I would say to think that they're not interested in Destiny itself, they definitely are. As we've seen, Destiny is still to this day one of the biggest games in the entire industry in terms of online, right? You saw a tweet that went out earlier today from Destiny Tracker. Yesterday alone, right now in a lull without a new expansion, Destiny 2 is hitting almost 1 million players a day. We know that the Witch Queen has, Bungie just announced this morning, over 1 million pre-orders, and that game still doesn't come out for a few more weeks. So it's going to be even higher than 1 million. And it's on track to have, the highest pre-orders ever for a Destiny 2 expansion, plus all those microtransaction DLCs for Destiny. And they've already said Destiny is going to be supported for many, many years to come. So definitely acquiring Destiny itself is actually a huge part of this deal. Also keep in mind, Sony has a movie division and, shows and all of that stuff. Destiny's a giant IP. I'm sure that Sony would love to have some sort of either Destiny movie or Destiny TV series. Don't be surprised if you see something like that. Look at how much content Sony's making for their first party IP now, with Uncharted on the way, with The Last of Us on the way. We know that there's even more projects, a Twisted Metal series spinning up. Don't be surprised at all if you see something Destiny related come out of that. And then also, like I tweeted online, a lot of people forget, Bungie's been building a giant new IP for years. This game started development, it appears, in 2018. Looks like it's already been in development. I'm sure that was very early pre-production, but they've been working on a new IP for about probably 3 to 4 years already. So there's also that in the tank. And if Sony thinks that this next IP can be anything like what Destiny was in terms of engagement and long-term growth, like that's also going to look very attractive. So don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm sure Alana had, a little bit more nuance to this as well. And she's spot on that the technology and all of that's a huge factor as well. But I wouldn't undersell how important getting Destiny and this next new IP is. Those are both huge factors for sure. All right. Thanks for that super chat, Plastic Hearts. Forzathon is back with a super chat. Thank you so much, Forzathon. What do you think EA is looking to do with DICE? Oh, that is a great question, y'all. They've had 3 back-to-back games that are largely considered failures in Star Wars Battlefront 2, Battlefield 5, and now Battlefield 2042. Yeah, I don't want to bully DICE or EA or Battlefield here, but you also have to be honest. Battlefield 2042 has been an utter disaster, a complete disaster. If you look at the now, keep in mind this game actually had a pretty big launch, especially for how rough of a state this game was in at launch, right? If you look at how it performed in NPD sales, if you look at how it performed on Steam, like launch itself was pretty darn nice. However, the legs on Battlefield 2042 have utterly collapsed. This game, in terms of like concurrent players on Steam at least, is incredibly low. And now they've delayed the first season all the way till summer. I mean, this is bad. This is really bad, especially because of the early metrics for Battlefield 2042. You guys know, if you follow me on Twitter or if you were here in the YouTube chats, you know, we were talking about how Battlefield was tracking absolutely gigantic, you know, over the summer with the trailers that were coming out, the types of engagement it was doing, the crazy hype you saw online, and then that just completely fell on its face, which is crazy. And you guys know me, I like to be a positive person. I don't want to sit here and be like, you know, oh, EA bad, DICE bad, but like there's just no doubt it's been a catastrophe in terms of like post-launch. So what's next for DICE? It's a great question. I expect that there's going to be some massive restructuring happening at DICE. We've already seen some evidence of that. There's already been some major departures from the studio since Battlefield 2042 came out. I suspect that's going to continue. I think they're going to completely restructure this studio. Battlefield 2042, to me, as someone who played it, it just had a lot of misguided, like, development ethos. Like, it seemed like the strategy for Battlefield 2042 in development was just go big on everything. Make the maps as big as possible, make the player count as big as possible. And the thing that did is it made the maps, in my opinion, really bad, and it also completely ruined the flow of the game. So, in my opinion, I actually think that the next Battlefield needs to go the complete opposite direction. I actually think they need to go back to 64 players, and I think that big maps are still important. You still need a big map, it's Battlefield, but not to the degree they are where there's just so much empty space and everything is so flat. I actually think let's go as big as possible, while it sounds good on paper, right? On paper, it sounds awesome. Giant maps, tons of players. But once you actually play it, it felt like there's just no flow to the battle and you have no impact really on the game itself. So I actually think the next Battlefield needs to go smaller again. Not super small, still 64 players, you know, or maybe even a little bit higher than that. But yeah, they're going to have to do some major restructuring at DICE. You know, what their next game's going to be, I have to imagine it's yet another Battlefield. It seems like they're not making another Battlefront. You know, we got the announcement of 3 new Star Wars games, including a first-person shooter that's not Battlefront. Definitely seems like there will be no Star Wars Battlefront 3, so you have to imagine it's going to be yet another Battlefield, but they need to radically make that game different than 2042 was. Thanks for that super chat. Frostbite Slash here with a 10. Thank you so much, Frostbite Slash. Always so supportive in chat. Jim Ryan said that Sony are by no means done acquiring studios. Yep, and they have plenty of more moves to make. Exactly. I honestly believe Square Enix or Capcom will be acquired by Sony before the end of the year. Neither one of these would surprise me. You know, a lot of people have said Sony won't buy a publisher. Sony won't buy a publisher. Sony doesn't have the money. To be clear, they do. They do. Sony does have the money to buy a publisher if they want to. And it's also very clear to me through comments from Jim Ryan in this latest interview that they are not only going to acquire more studios, but also aggressively. If you read Jim's quote, it wasn't just a vague, you know, oh yeah, we'll probably buy more. He said, as Frostbite says here, not only did he say that they're going to acquire more studios, but the way he said it, he literally said, we have many more moves to make. That to me sounds like an ambitious strategy of acquisitions. So, could they buy Square Enix or Capcom? I wouldn't rule out either one of these at all. Do I think that it's a lock? I also by no means think that it's a lock. I don't think that we can flat out say they're going to buy a publisher We will have to see. I've seen a lot of speculation. There was some tweet that went around about EA. I think that no one's going to acquire EA, at least a platform holder, and there's a very prime reason for that specifically. Here's the thing with EA, most of the games that make EA a lot of money, right? If you're acquiring somebody, you're trying to acquire, obviously the talent is a huge part of that, but also it's going to be the IP that they own. EA, if you look at them, most of the games that make EA a lot of money are sports titles, which contractually have to be multi-platform, by the way. It outright says it in the contracts. The Madden contracts, the NHL contracts, the FIFA contracts. There's actually language in these contracts that require these games to be multi-platform. So, A, a ton of it is sports games. And then B, the other games that are making them a lot of money right now are Star Wars, which again, most of these Star Wars games are probably somewhat required to be multi-platform. That doesn't mean I don't think that you could sign an exclusive Star Wars game, right? I don't think that it's impossible that Microsoft or Sony could go out there and make an exclusive Star Wars game. But I'm saying EA in specific, if you're buying them, you're really buying them for a lot of licensed games. And that to me doesn't seem that attractive if you're a platform holder. Now, if you're somebody like Google, if you're somebody like Amazon, if you're somebody like Apple, that you're just trying to come into the industry and you're not necessarily trying to have a ton of exclusives, then EA might make more sense. But for like Sony or Microsoft specifically, EA to me doesn't make a whole lot of sense for an acquisition. Take-Two is another possibility out there. Again, though, I don't see Take-Two as likely, but I would say it's definitely way more attractive than EA is. However, once you go down below that, once you go down to the Square Enixes, the Capcoms, the Ubisofts, the Segas, these types of companies, realistically, right now when you're in a buying market and you look at the market caps on these companies, I think it's virtually impossible some of these don't get acquired. I think it's virtually impossible. Now, if it'll be Sony buying them, if it'll be Microsoft buying them, who knows? And do I think that every one of these are going to get bought? Not necessarily. But some of these, until governments step in and start blocking it, realistically, you could get Square Enix or Capcom for probably $10 billion or less, right? I would say that's the ceiling on what it's going to cost you. And $10 billion is a lot of money. But keep in mind, Microsoft just spent $70 billion on Activision, and Sony just dropped $3.6 billion on a single studio. If you can get a publisher for $10 billion or less, it's very attractive. So Frostbite, I would say you're not crazy to think that Square Enix or Capcom could get acquired by Sony. It is definitely possible. I wouldn't lock it in yet. Right now, everything is still so volatile, and we don't know at what point the government's going to step in and start shutting these sorts of things down. But, yeah, it's not impossible. Not impossible at all, Frostbite. All right, and then we had a second super chat here from Frostbite. Thank you so much for that second one. That's very kind of you, Frostbite. Another studio which I think they will get, which might seem crazy to some people, and also very polarizing, is CD Projekt Red. Thoughts on this and other possible acquisitions? I think it is very likely that CD Projekt Red actually could be acquired. I actually think it's more likely Microsoft acquires them than PlayStation. I know you're saying PlayStation here. That to me seems like a bit of a stretch compared to Microsoft. Microsoft just has a way better relationship with CD Projekt Red than PlayStation does. Again, money speaks more than anything. But one thing you also learn through a lot of these acquisitions is also it's not just money, but it's also relationships. I would say that if anyone's going to buy CD Projekt Red, it is more than likely Xbox. They've had many marketing deals in the past, whether that was on, The Witcher 2, which was a console exclusive, whether that was Cyberpunk, which had Xbox marketing behind it. And there was also the whole deal where PlayStation pulled it off the store, and we know that that didn't go very well for either party in terms of relationship. So PlayStation to me seems like a stretch to get CD Projekt, but again, it's not impossible. If someone does acquire CD Projekt Red, I think it will be Microsoft. But the other thing that I will say is I think CD Projekt Red is very likely. I'd put it at over a 50% chance CD Projekt Red gets acquired in the next few years unless the government starts shutting this down. And there's a really key reason for that. They're basically the biggest independent developer that's still on the board whenever you look at like market cap and workforce now that Bungie's gone. A lot of people forget Bungie was one of the biggest independent studios in the world. You know, a lot of people are talking about how Sony spent so much on Bungie for one studio, and I do agree the price seems a little elevated, but that's part of just what's happening right now. But they have like over 800 employees. Like, it's a huge studio. CD Projekt Red is basically the biggest fish still out there that's independently owned, that's also not a full-scale publisher, right? We know they have GOG. We know that they have a storefront, and that like they kind of are getting into, eventually they wanted to do some more publishing type things, but they're really still mostly a single studio, right? So that's going to be attractive for anyone to acquire, like anybody. If you're looking for someone to acquire, CD Projekt Red is one of the biggest fish still out there that's not a publisher. So I would put CD Projekt Red getting acquired at over 50%. Yes. Yep, I think it's very likely. Several more super chats pouring in. Thank you so much, everybody. Brock here with a 2. How much of a steal was all of ZeniMax for $7 billion? It was an absolute steal. They got a great deal on this in retrospect. Bungie by itself basically cost half of what Microsoft paid for ZeniMax, right? And that was acquiring Fallout and Elder Scrolls and multiple studios. So here's the thing. As these acquisitions have been ramping up, so has the demand for price. So I kind of sent a tweet out about this that was about Insomniac, but it has to do with ZeniMax as well. You know, Sony got the deal of a lifetime on freaking Insomniac. They literally got the studio for, what was it, $229 million? I mean, y'all, if you put Insomniac on the market today, you're paying at least double that. And I'm not kidding, at least double. And people will say, well, you know, Insomniac was cheaper because of the lack of owned IP. And that's definitely true, right? Part of the reason that Insomniac sold for cheaper than, let's say, for example, a Bungie or, you know, a ZeniMax is because look at the IP that those companies own, right? Like, when you buy Bungie, you also get access to Destiny, one of the biggest online games in the world. Whenever you buy ZeniMax, you know, you're getting all these studios and this workforce, but you're also getting Elder Scrolls, you're getting Fallout, you're getting Doom. Whereas Insomniac didn't really own very many IP, right? Most of the stuff they worked on, like Ratchet and Clank, for example, was owned by Sony, and Spider-Man, as we know, is a Marvel game. But still, part of the reason they got Insomniac so cheap wasn't lack of IP, that was a factor, but it was also because Sony bought them before we got into a crazy arms race for acquisitions. Kind of the same thing with Bethesda and ZeniMax. Don't get me wrong, Microsoft got them once acquisitions were starting to hit fairly heavy, but if you put ZeniMax on the market today, right now, would they sell for more than $7 billion? Yes, they would. So right now, as all these acquisitions are happening, it's an arms race. Prices are going up and up and up and up. And that's part of why you're seeing so many acquisitions. It's not just that these companies have money and they're wanting to spend it, but also companies are wanting to sell because they're able to get a premium right now for their company. They're able to sell, you know, what they're worth and more because people are bidding like crazy. Look what happened with Codemasters. Codemasters was going to be acquired by, if my memory serves correct, Take-Two. They came in with a big offer. Then EA came in with a bigger offer, over $1 billion, and got them for over $1 billion for Codemasters, right? That's what we're seeing across the board, and that's the same thing that happened with ZeniMax. If Microsoft tried to buy ZeniMax today, right, let's say they had bought Activision Blizzard first, and now, you know, Bungie sold, and now ZeniMax was up for sale, it would cost more than the $7 billion they paid. So that's just going to keep going up right now, and that's part of why you're going to see so many acquisitions. Isn't just because the big players willing to spend the money, but the company's willing to sell because they can get more now than ever before. So yeah, it was a steal, no doubt, Brock. Hanato here with a 2 super chat. Do you think FromSoftware could be bought? That, from my understanding, is a bit difficult because the company that owns them. Now, keep in mind, I always say this, I'm no expert on Japan, right? There's a lot of people that do a ton of research on the Japanese market. Like, there's people that spend all day, every day talking about the Japanese market. I do my research, I read all the charts, I look at the Japanese sales as much as anybody, but I'll just be honest, I'm way more interested in the West than I am in Japan, specifically in terms of market performance, because Japan is kind of its own little, you know, thing. It's still huge. It's a huge market, but what I mean is the trends in Japan don't reflect the trends in the West, right? So if I focus more on the West, I see more of the larger picture of what's actually happening in this industry than if I hyper focus on Japan, because there's so much their own market. But it's still a very, very important market. But I always preface this when I say I'm talking about Japan. I'm not an expert. But from what I understand, the company that owns FromSoft, they own like a lot of other things, and it's not just as easy as coming in and just buying FromSoftware. And from what I've heard from people that do a lot of research into Japan, it's very unlikely anyone's going to buy FromSoft just because of the way that works. Now, FromSoftware was a completely independent studio. There isn't a single doubt in my mind everyone would be trying to buy them. I think Sony would be trying to buy them. I think Xbox would be trying to buy them. I think everybody would be trying to buy FromSoftware. But from what I understand, it's extremely unlikely because you'd have to buy the parent company, and the odds of buying that parent company is very low. So, Hanato, I'm going to be honest, no, I don't think anyone buys FromSoftware. I don't see that happening at all. Brock with another super chat. Thank you so much, Brock. Given any more thought on World of Warcraft on Game Pass PC? Yeah, I mean, I still think that they're going to integrate it in some way with PC. I think you're going to see all the Activision IP, get integrated in some capacity. Again, do I think that your WoW sub is just going to become part of Game Pass? I personally still think that's unlikely unless Microsoft introduces another tier of Game Pass. So if there's another tier that's even higher than Ultimate, maybe they'll start to include things like subscriptions in that. I find that unlikely. However, WoW expansions as being part of PC Game Pass, probably very likely. So that even alone, right, would probably get a lot of people to subscribe. If even just, hey, you get the expansions, that would be pretty huge. So I would say WoW expansions becoming part of Game Pass, not a lock, but I would say it's a very good chance. I'm still doubtful, though, that they include the subs. The subscriptions, I think that's unlikely. And then we have one last one here from Brock. Thank you so much, Brock. Odds of Ubisoft being bought by the end of 22. By the end of 22, I don't know, but the odds of them being acquired in general, extremely high, as long as governments don't step in. The big question right now with acquisitions is going to be, at what point does the government shut it down? Right now, it's a free-for-all. Everyone's just able to throw around cash, spend, buy. I do think at some point the government is going to start stepping in. I don't know exactly where that is. Do they allow 3 or 4 more publishers to be acquired before they step in? Or do they step in after Activision Blizzard and say no more publishers, right? Maybe they still allow studios to be acquired, but maybe the government shuts it down. Listen, no more acquisitions for publishers. So it completely depends on how things play out with the government long term. However, if it remains a complete spending spree, free for all, do I think the odds of Ubisoft being acquired are high? Yes, I think they're very high. Very high. In fact, I would say more likely than Square Enix and Capcom, specifically because those are Japanese publishers, and I think Ubisoft would just be a lot easier to buy and make the deal happen. So, and I also think Ubisoft's upcoming release slate is highly questionable. So all of those factors, I think it's very high. Yeah, I think it's a very good chance that someone buys Ubisoft unless the government starts shutting this stuff down. All right, Super Chats are cleared for now. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you so much. Thanks for a great turnout. Hope you're all having fun. I'm pumped to be back. I'm energized. We have so much to talk about. Thank you so much, everybody. It's awesome. All right, free questions. Deadly 8. Hello there, Benji. Do you think it is possible that Sony might acquire Square Enix? We just talked about this. And Sega next. Out of all the big 3 Japanese publishers, Square, Capcom, Sega, who do you think the likely to be acquired are? I think the most likely publisher to get acquired is Square Enix out of the Japanese ones. Sega as well, kind of, but Sega, and this is true of almost all of these Japanese publishers, by the way, they have businesses outside of just making games. That's something you see less of in these Western companies. A lot of these big Western publishers, basically they just make games, right? Ubisoft, they basically just make games. Activision, they basically just make games. Like, they might do a few other things, but it's very much mostly just making PC and console games. Whereas a lot of these Japanese publishers do a lot of other different stuff, right? Whether it's, arcade businesses or whether it's merch businesses or just all kinds of stuff. So, but of those, I actually think the one that is most attractive without the craziest price and is most likely, I think it is Square Enix. I think Square Enix has the best odds of being acquired out of these companies. Number 2, I would say Sega. And number 3, I would say Capcom. I don't think Capcom has almost any drive to sell. If you're Capcom, I almost have no idea why you would sell your company right now, because I think the upside on Capcom currently is extraordinarily high. We've seen huge growth with Monster Hunter. We've seen great growth with Resident Evil. There's reports that Dragon's Dogma 2 is on the way, and, the next Street Fighter, which I think will probably perform very well. Like, again, sometimes someone comes at you with an offer you can't refuse. But Capcom, to me, they just seem the most unlikely to want to sell their business. Whereas Square Enix, while Final Fantasy has done very well for Square Enix, and they've had some other hits as well, you also have seen a lot of underperformances from Square Enix, whether that's going to be Avengers, whether that's going to be like the last Just Cause game. So, you haven't seen them necessarily, right? Wasn't that Square Enix published, if I'm remembering correctly? And you also saw Tomb Raider start to underperform for them. Deus Ex underperformed for them. So, Square Enix is in a solid spot, mostly because Final Fantasy is kind of carrying them at the moment, and some other JRPGs. But they don't, to me, currently have the business upside that Capcom does. And Sega's going to be the cheapest. You can get Sega probably the cheapest out of these, especially if you were able to spin off just gaming from Sega, if you were able to acquire just specifically the game development side. But that's how I would rank them personally. Most likely Square Enix, then Sega, and then Capcom. Miles Morales. The industry will consolidate even more, according to Jeff Keighley. No surprise to me at all. So you think it is possible that Sony/Microsoft will start acquiring so many publishers that they become against antitrust monopoly law? So monopoly, basically zero chance. We're already at the point where there's basically a 0% chance any of these companies can become a monopoly. And there's a main reason for that. As long as Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft, those three particularly, are in the game, it's going to become impossible to argue for a monopoly. Like, truly impossible. And this isn't even factoring companies like Tencent, for example, right? So, monopoly specifically, no. The only way we would actually start to approach monopoly is if, put it this way, if Microsoft bought Sony or they bought Nintendo, which I think there's a 0% chance of, by the way. We're just talking hypotheticals. If Microsoft went out and bought Sony or they bought Nintendo, then you would start to be getting highly risky, because you would just be taking out a platform holder, right? You're just straight taking a platform holder out of the market. I truly think that would get shut down instantaneously. So monopoly, I would say almost 0% chance. However, antitrust, which is quite a bit different than monopoly. Antitrust means just you're starting to make things non-competitive, right? Monopoly basically means you're the only entity really capable of business in an industry, right? While maybe theoretically another company could come along, you own an industry so much that it's essentially one company running the whole thing. Antitrust just means you're making a non-competitive environment. It doesn't have to be a monopoly to be antitrust. Yes, I think it's very possible that governments start to consider antitrust. I don't think we're there yet. I would say if you see another couple publishers fall, it will get shut down, yes. Yep. I think companies like Bungie can be acquired forever. Bungie, CD Projekt Red, no one's going to really shut that down, in my opinion. It's the publishers. If you start to see Ubisoft get acquired, you start to see, Take-Two get acquired, you see EA get acquired, Activision's already off the table, Square Enix. If you start to see publishers fall, I do think governments are going to step in. Now, at what point they step in, I don't know. Like I said, maybe they let another 2 or 3 publishers get bought before they do. But that will get shut down at some point, in my opinion, yes. Devs, no. Independent studios, no. But pubs, yes. Yoda Soda. Hello, Benji boy. Don't you think it's weird that Sony purchased Bungie instead of someone like Sega who goes for the same price? Not necessarily. Isn't the buyout useless because Bungie remained independent from SIE? I'm actually not too surprised by it because people just forget how big Destiny is and probably how big Sony thinks the next IP from Bungie is. A lot of people that don't play Destiny, this feels really weird to you, but you're literally buying one of the biggest online games in the world. Let's look at something right now. Let's look at something. So let's go. Let me check something really quick. All right. Oop. So Destiny right now, as we speak on Steam, this is in a lack of content, right? This is a lack of content. There's no new DLC out. There's no new expansions out. That game still right now on Steam, as we speak, has over 60,000 people playing it. That's concurrent at once. Once this expansion drops, that's going to soar. What's the, probably the weekly peak? I mean, Destiny's still hitting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of players per day, across console and PC. They are giant. Destiny is literally bigger than any game Sega owns. It ain't up for debate. There's not a single game coming out of Sega right now that's generating as much money as Destiny is. I mean, The Witch Queen has 1 million pre-orders by itself, and that game's not even out yet. So I don't think it's crazy, to be honest. I do think that maybe Sony paid a little too much for Bungie, if I'm being honest with you. Do I think that Bungie was worth $3.6 billion? I mean, it does seem high, right? It does seem high. Part of that, though, is what we're talking about. Everything is getting weighted up. I mean, Codemasters sold for over $1 billion, and they just make racing games, basically. And racing games ain't as big as Destiny. So I'm not shocked that they sold for a lot, but 3.6 does seem a little steep to me. But am I shocked that Sony went for Bungie over Sega? No, actually, in terms of how much money they'll make off of it, I mean, long term, to be honest, they'll probably make more money off of Bungie than Sega. Sega makes some great games, but most of them aren't huge sellers. Yakuza is not a huge seller. Persona is big, which is an Atlas game, but I'm assuming you would get Atlas with Sega. It's big, but it ain't no Destiny, and it ain't probably whatever this next IP is going to be from them. So I get that Bungie might not be attractive to a lot of the audience, but I mean, it kind of makes more sense than Sega, to be honest with you. In terms of strictly business, if we're only talking business here, right? If we're only talking business. Split End. What up, Split End? My buddy, best mod in the business. Saying, Benji, when are you being acquired? I have no idea. But I'm willing to be acquired, and I'm willing to be acquired for cheap. So for Microsoft or Sony, if you're watching this, you could buy me for cheap. I'm a retail worker. It wouldn't cost you much, If you're throwing billions around, you throw me you throw me less than 50K, and you've got me. Now, am I worth that? Probably not. But if they want to, I'm willing to be acquired. I am willing to sell. Red Dead series. Who do you think Sony is acquiring next? Any predictions? Yeah, we haven't talked about specifically who I think Sony's most likely to get next. I honestly think Square Enix is in the running. I legitimately do. I don't think that's... Put it this way. If you asked me to put money on it, I wouldn't go Square Enix, but I actually think it's more possible than some people think. So, I mean, I would put Square Enix in the nebulous possibility range. But most likely, I wouldn't say they're most likely. Interesting question. See, so many studios have been bought. I mean, that's the interesting thing here, y'all. We're starting to get low on studios that are out there that are super attractive that aren't already with publishers. And some of those that are out there, I think, are actually more likely to go to Microsoft. There's all sorts of rumblings about IO Interactive in Microsoft. I think that's very possible that that happens, considering IO Interactive is currently making an exclusive game for Xbox. There's been lots of rumblings for a long time about Avalanche going to Xbox. Again, I think that's way more likely than Sony coming in, considering they're making Contraband an Xbox exclusive. So, you know, a lot of these independent studios have either already been acquired or I think are actually more likely to go to Microsoft. I'd say Ember Lab. Ember Lab, it would be someone that I could easily see going to Sony. So that's who I'll throw out. I think Ember Lab is the most likely. If we're just talking pure most likely scenario, I'd say Ember Lab. You know, the ones that made Kena. Split End 89. Metacritic predictions for February. Ooh, Dying Light 2, Sifu, Horizon Forbidden West, and Elden Ring. I'm going to say Dying Light 2, I'm going to predict low 80s. I'm going to say 81, 82 for Dying Light. Sifu, this could go anywhere because it's kind of a total unknown in terms of like quality, right? Dying Light, you could at least look at the first game and kind of base it off that. Same with Horizon, and even same with Elden Ring. It's a new IP, but you look at From's track record. Sifu could go anywhere. I'm going to predict Sifu actually also low 80s, right around Dying Light. I'm going to think both those low 80s, 81, 82, 83, maybe something like that. I think both Horizon Forbidden West and Elden Ring are both going to go over 90 Metacritic. I do. Yep. It's going to be wild getting possibly 2 90 Metacritic games in 1 month, but I actually predict that for both. Horizon Zero Dawn was already at 89 on Meta, so it needs to just barely increase to go over, right? We're talking very slightly. It needs to go from 89 to 90. I find that extremely likely. And then let's look at From's track record. I mean, my goodness. I think Elden Ring being 90 plus Metacritic is almost guaranteed unless it just completely botches it. Let's look. So let's look at Sekiro first. 90 Metacritic. Sekiro, 90 on PS4, 91 on Xbox. Let's look at Dark Souls. Dark Souls 3, 89 on PlayStation, 89 on PC, so it's already basically there, right? It's 1 point short of it. Let's look at Bloodborne. $92 Metacritic, like, it's very likely. You never know. I mean, they could botch Elden Ring, but Elden Ring being over 90 Metacritic is very likely. If it does miss it, it's going to be barely, probably 89 like Dark Souls 3. And then Horizon also very likely to be 90 plus. Both those are very likely. Put it this way, I would say if Horizon or Elden Ring miss 90, it's going to be barely. They're going to be like 88 or 89 in my opinion. Yoda Soda following up with the Sega question. What I mean is Sega owns many IPs and many studios. I feel like it would have been better and bang for the buck to buy them and make their content exclusive instead of Bungie. Again, though, I would actually disagree strictly in terms of business. The fact is that Sega games aren't huge sellers. You know, they might be beloved games. Like, y'all, Yakuza Like a Dragon is literally one of my favorite JRPGs of all time. The degree that I loved Like a Dragon, it is one of my favorite games of all time. I loved that game. Wow, did I love that game. I can't even believe how much I loved that game. Like, they make some awesome stuff. But, like, if you're talking, like, actually super valuable, the only IP there that is super valuable is Sonic. The other ones are nice. They're great additions. They're super cool things to have in your library. But, like, do I think any of those are as valuable as Destiny? No. In fact, I know they're not. They're not as valuable as Destiny is. So, I mean, there ain't many Sega games getting over 1 million pre-orders alone. So, no. Yoda, I totally get your point. But if we're talking strictly business, do I think Sega's a better buy than Bungie? No. I think Bungie's actually probably more likely to make more money long term, especially if their next IP is successful. Forzathon says Sega has way too many avenues that Sony or Microsoft does not need, like their real estate. Also, the company's choice seems to be forgotten in these conversations. Yeah, don't get me wrong. I think Sega is an attractive buy. I'm not trying to say like there's no reason to buy Sega. If you are Sony or Microsoft and you can get Sega for a good deal, particularly if somehow you were able to spin off just the gaming assets out of it, I do think it's an attractive buy. It's just that I don't think it's actually as attractive as Bungie. I know that sounds crazy, but you have to factor in the IP. And Destiny's way bigger than anything Sega's got, besides Sonic. Sonic's huge. You know, Sonic's in movies and all that kind of stuff. All right, let me make sure there's no super chats. We do have a super chat. Let me hit that super chat really quick. Mega 3000 with a super chat. Sony / Take-Two rumors are everywhere. Thoughts, Benji? Unlikely. Again, we're in a crazy time right now where anything can happen. If you would have asked me if I thought it was likely Microsoft was going to buy Activision Blizzard, I would have said, no way, right? I would have never predicted that. So it ain't impossible. I do think that's pretty unlikely, though, because what is Take-Two's market cap right now? What is Take-Two's market cap right now? I mean, it would be expensive. Woo! It would be expensive for Sony. Y'all, oh my God. I'm going to say almost zero. It is not a lock, but you're going to see why I'm going to say it's almost zero. The market cap for Take-Two right now is at $18.3 billion. You aren't paying market cap. You're paying above market cap for an acquisition. Put it this way, you're not getting Take-Two for less than $25 billion. It's not happening. You're not getting Take-Two for less than $25 billion. And it could go higher than that. It could go higher than $25 billion. I don't think Sony's going to drop $25 billion. I really don't. I think Sony is still willing to spend billions. But let's look at the difference here, y'all. Take-Two's market cap right now is $18.3 billion, and Square Enix's market cap is $5.7 billion. 5, 10, 15. You're talking almost a fourth of what, the market cap of, it's over 3 times more for Take-Two. Square Enix is going to be way more likely than Take-Two to be acquired by Sony. Again, we're in a crazy time frame. You never know. Wild things can happen. But the fact is you're not going to get Take-Two for likely less than $25 billion, and I just cannot see Sony spending that. I just can't see them spending $25 billion. Billions, yeah, but I would put that way lower odds than something like Square Enix. Jeremy G with a 5 here. Thank you so much, Jeremy G, for that super chat. If Sony gets Square Enix, does Microsoft conveniently open up 100 new spots at the initiative and somehow only get applications from those that worked at Crystal Dynamics? Well, again, to be clear, I don't think Square Enix is a lock by any means. I just think out of the players on the board, they're probably one of the most likely for Sony, strictly because of the cost. They're going to be in that price range that Sony can afford if they want to do it. It's still going to be expensive, but it's at least theoretically possible. So, if a hypothetical scenario, they were to get them, would the initiative somehow get Crystal Dynamics employees? Yeah, that's an interesting wrinkle, right? As we know, Crystal Dynamics is currently making an Xbox exclusive, right? They're co-developing Perfect Dark. Here's the thing. I'm going to spin this off a little bit. So first of all, would they get applications from Crystal Dynamics? Probably. There's probably some people at Crystal Dynamics that are really liking working on Perfect Dark. So I wouldn't be surprised if Microsoft tried to poach some of that talent if this were to happen. The other thing I'll spin this off and say, I was having a conversation with somebody. It's no secret in the industry right now that Phil Spencer's trying to get a Japanese studio. Like, this is known. You ask anybody and they're all going to tell you the same thing. Phil Spencer and Xbox want a Japanese studio. But the thing that's interesting is I don't think Xbox really has any chance of getting a Capcom, Square Enix, or even a Sega. Sega would be actually, out of those, the most likely for Microsoft to get. Even though I said Square Enix overall I think is more likely. to be acquired than Sega. I just think because there's a better chance Sony gets them. It'd be easier for Sony to acquire Square Enix than Microsoft because Sony is headquartered in Japan. So interestingly, I think if, let's say, Square Enix were to go to PlayStation, I think Microsoft might end up having to build their own Japanese studio. It's starting to look unlikely to me that they're going to be able to acquire a big name Japanese studio. Platinum just seems extremely unlikely given the relationship between those two companies. The publishers, again, I don't think that Japan would allow a Western company to buy one of the major publishers. Never know, but I find it very unlikely. So, you start to get into an area of who are they going to buy then? And they might just have to build their own studio. Like, honestly, that might be the best answer for Microsoft. If they really want a Japanese team, besides Tango, of course, they might just have to build it. Microsoft might just have to start a brand new studio in Japan and try and poach talent. So, you never know. Maybe they don't, strictly take from Crystal Dynamics, but they might try to poach Japanese talent in general. It's definitely possible. I think that might be their only option for getting a big Japanese studio there. All right, Super Chats are cleared again. Batman Forever. Do you think it is possible that all major third-party publishers will consolidate to the two big players? Could, in 5 to 10 years from now, see an industry where all publishers are under the big two? No, only because I think the government will shut that down. If it was allowed free reign, I think you could get pretty close to that. I definitely think you would see Microsoft at least buy one more publisher. Maybe not Sony. I still think Sony is going to maybe try for a publisher, to be honest with you. One of the smaller ones that we've been talking about. But if the government just allowed free reign, I think you could get pretty close to that. However, I don't think we're going to because I think the government is going to shut it down. Yeah, I think they are. I think they're going to shut down publisher acquisitions pretty soon. I think Activision Blizzard is going to go through. I think maybe Sony would be allowed to buy one more. After that, I don't know. I really don't know if Antitrust, they would allow it to keep going. But we'll have to see. But I don't think they definitely wouldn't let it get down to only, Sony and Microsoft owning all the third-party publishers. I think that will get shut down way before that. Could be wrong, though. Fernando Harada. Hello, Benji. Is Capcom safe when it comes to acquisitions? I think so. Capcom is my favorite third-party publisher with lots of legendary IPs like Resident Evil, Devil May Cry, Street Fighter, Monster Hunter, and Mega Man. I hope Capcom doesn't get bought. Like we've talked about, I think they're pretty safe. Only because I think they're going to be completely unmotivated to sell. I think both Sony and Microsoft would love to own Capcom and those IPs. But again, I just don't think Capcom has any motivation to sell. None at all. I think they look at their probably future growth trajectory and they aren't interested in selling. So I would say Capcom's probably safe from acquisition. Never know, but probably. Homersley Ford. Sup, Benji? I hope you're doing great. Doing so much better, to be honest. So much better. Thoughts on Battlefield 2042 Season 1 being delayed till early summer? Yeah, it's a disaster. Can they recover from that? I don't want to be cynical, but probably not. I think they should issue refunds and can the game, LOL. So, put it this way. Does DICE and EA have to try to at least save Battlefield 2042? They have to try. So, Hamish, I don't think they have to issue refunds. I don't think they need to necessarily instantly kill the game. The reality is they spent a fortune developing Battlefield 2042. They have to at least try to save it. Do I think it's likely, though, that this game has some kind of amazing turnaround? I'd say almost no. No, I think there's almost no chance. Because I think the core game's flawed. That's just been my opinion, really, since I played the early access on Xbox with EA Play. From the very beginning, I just thought the core design of the game is flawed. Maps are too big, maps are way too empty, and there's no flow to any of the battle. It's just not fun to play, So I think it's almost impossible to save Battlefield 2042 because I think the core game itself doesn't work. Like, it's just not a fun game to play in my opinion. So you never know. Maybe they can, but yeah, I'm not optimistic about it. This will be interesting. How to find this would come up. The FTC will be investigating Microsoft's Activision deal. Does that make things harder for Microsoft? FTC stopped NVIDIA ARM deal. You're seeing a lot of people say this. I don't really think so. Couple things to keep in mind. The Department of Justice isn't involved in this one. I think partially because the leader of the DOJ was partially responsible. I believe, I've seen this reported, and if it was misreported, I apologize. But I think he already did an antitrust investigation on Microsoft during the .com era. So it would be seen probably as a conflict of interest for the DOJ to also, the same guy, also lead another investigation into a completely different sector of the business for Microsoft. So I actually think that that might be part of a factor, because that's what happens is the Department of Justice, from what I understand, I'm no law expert, but from what I understand, the Department of Justice and the FTC basically decide between themselves who's going to handle what. Wouldn't be surprised if that was partially an element, that they didn't want a conflict of interest there. So that could be an element. Another element of this is that it's a giant deal. It's going to be investigated. This was always going to be under investigation. You're talking literally one of the biggest tech deals of all time. It's one of the biggest, period, in tech. Not just the biggest in gaming. It's one of the biggest ever in tech. You know, so there's just no way that flies through completely, you know, without being looked at. People are going to look at that. Do I think it's unlikely this goes through? No, I'm still on the side that it's very likely it goes through, especially because we're talking about media here. And I think media specifically, entertainment, it's much easier to get very close to monopoly in that specific area than it is other technology sectors, because it seems less threatening, right? With media, it's just entertainment, right? It's an entertainment consumption. Anyone can come up with anything with entertainment. Anyone can come up with any movie, any narrative idea, any book, any game that they want to. I think the area that FTC and these others, you know, the DOJ are going to come a lot harder down on tech acquisitions, or things that are seen as dangerous to people, right? Part of the reason I think that the NVIDIA ARM deal was shut down is because the whole drama with chips, right? Do you really want NVIDIA by themselves to be running so much of the chip industry? Because that has a lot of repercussions outside of pure entertainment, right? Part of the reason Facebook is getting heavily regulated and looked at right now is because them trying to buy so many social media platforms and apps, which definitely creates a danger to consumers that, you know, Facebook is running your life, right? Because they have complete access to all of your contacts everywhere and what you're seeing. It's a lot different than entertainment. So I find it unlikely that, like, you know, this is the battle that FTC is going to be willing to just like lay the gauntlet down. Like, this is where we're fighting with tech, video games. Find that very unlikely. So it could happen, but I find it unlikely, you know, given the other battles in tech right now. So I think they'll look at it, but I still expect it to go through. Yeah. Making sure super chats are cleared. Nope, we actually do have a super chat here from Timmer with a 2. Thank you so much, Timmer, saying keep being awesome. Thank you so much, Timmer. Thank you for being awesome and supportive in like every single chat. I don't think you've ever missed a chat, at least since you started coming in here. Thank you so much, man. You keep being awesome too. Miles Morales, another question. Why do you think we reached a point where the gaming industry necessarily needs continuous consolidation to survive? Is it due to the rising cost of game dev? Not too much, in my opinion. I'm sure that is a factor, but the real reason this is happening right now is it's subscriptions. Sounds funny, but no, that's literally the main reason. The main reason that all of this is happening right now is because of subscriptions. And people are going to say, how is that, right? You're saying like EA buy people and they don't. Well, actually, they do have a subscription, EA Play. But really, Microsoft kicked this off with Game Pass. Like, Game Pass is really what caused the dominoes to fall. So, really, if you want to be a finger-pointing blame game, you can basically blame Microsoft at this point because of Game Pass. It was always inevitable that the gaming industry would consolidate, in my opinion. I don't think that it's shocking that it's happening now because all other entertainment has. We've talked about this on the channel before. Like, the fact that Disney was allowed to buy Fox people are like screaming about antitrust and monopoly in gaming right now. Y'all, that is so much more antitrust than the things we're talking about. Disney buying Fox is like, y'all, that was super sketchy. At the end of the day, it still went through, and they had to make some consolidations, but at the end of the day, it still went through. Subscription and Game Pass. The thing is Microsoft went so acquisition heavy not to sell consoles. They really didn't. Don't get me wrong. Does Microsoft want to sell 100 million Xbox Series consoles? I guarantee you they want to sell that. But is the main reason they went out there and bought multiple publishers and all of these IP and all of these studios to sell Xboxes? No. They did it so they can get to eventually 100 million plus Game Pass subscribers. That's why they did it. They did it because Phil Spencer has an internal mandate that he wants a AAA Xbox first-party release releasing every single quarter. And you can't do that unless you have a ton of freaking teams. So, I mean, that's really the main reason. The main reason is Microsoft went ultra aggressive for Game Pass. I'm not telling you it's a bad thing. So for anyone, don't get up in arms and say, Benji's saying Xbox is evil for doing this. I don't think they are. I think it makes sense if you're a business. Just like it made sense for Disney to make Disney Plus and put Marvel on there and Star Wars on there and the Fox content. Like, it just makes business sense. But like, that's really what started it. And then, you saw Sony start to really double down. Do I think Sony would have went out and bought all of these studios if Microsoft wouldn't have went so aggressive? I actually don't. I think some of these probably would have happened. But do I think, like, to the degree where we're at now, where it's just like buy, I don't think that ever would have happened without Game Pass entering the industry. At least not at this moment. I think consolidation eventually was inevitable. It's happened in every entertainment industry there is. But Game Pass is really what fueled what's happening right now. Joseph X1. Benji, after Sony spends $3.6 billion on just one developer, do you think it's possible, oh yeah, we've talked about this, for Sony to acquire a publisher worth less than $10 billion? Capcom, Sega, Square Enix, and Ubi. Yes, yep. I think it's extremely possible, yes. Extremely possible. I think we had a super chat. Let me hit that super chat. We do. Highlander001 here with a 20. How long have we been going? An hour? I have a hard out in 30 minutes. So I've got 30 minutes left to chat, and then I have to go because I got to go to work. Highlander here with a 20. Holy cow, Highlander. Thank you. It's very generous. 20 super chat here from Highlander. After the last 2 weeks with Activision, Microsoft, and Sony Bungie, Twitter for the last 2 weeks have been like the monkey house with the monkeys throwing poo at each other. You're not wrong. FTC, DOJ, look at any deal over 90 million. Yeah, exactly. So for the second part with the FTC stuff, DOJ, not shocking. It's $70 billion that's going to get investigated. However, Highlander, you are spot on that Twitter has been a mess. Even for me. So my Twitter feed in general, I talk about this all the time. Like, people are so supportive of me. It's ridiculous. The amount of kindness people show to me is crazy. You see a lot of people always on Twitter complaining about their audience, which I find really weird because it's like, if people, I'm not here to judge anybody, but like, none of us with any sort of platform are owed anything. Like, none of you have to be in this chat right now, right? You're voluntarily giving your time to do this. You don't have to follow me on Twitter, right? Like, you don't need to spend time following me on Twitter. You're going out of your way to do that. I don't understand people that are always combative with the audience like they're owed something. You're not owed shit. Sorry for my language, but you're not owed anything. You could lose your entire audience tomorrow. Like, I just don't get that thought process. So even for me, somebody that has a very, I would say, overall positive audience, great audience, even my Twitter feed has been a freaking mess the last few weeks, and that's somewhat understandable. I mean, these acquisitions are going to be super spicy, right? They're going to have people very upset. They're going to have people very worried. So that's why I haven't been lashing out at people and stuff, because I'm telling you, even some of the comments on some of my tweets have just been console wars. But it just is what it is. I get that this is going to be very controversial stuff. So I'm actually on the side that leans a little more optimistic about this sort of thing. I actually think that overall Activision Blizzard being acquired by Microsoft is probably going to be a net positive. I think it's going to create a way better environment for those workers. And I also think it's going to give those IPs way more chance to see variety instead of, y'all, I mean, Call of Duty was it. Activision, every single Activision studio was making Call of Duty. Not Blizzard, but every Activision internal team. It's hard for me to imagine that Microsoft acquiring them is going to end up worse for creativity and worse for the workforce than them being in the situation they were is. So I'm someone that's not as negative on acquisitions as a whole, but I do understand why people are going to be super worried and concerned about it. But Highlander, there's no doubt that the console war stuff is at a fever pitch currently. I do think some of that's going to calm down once we're out of this crazy acquisition phase, but console wars are eternal. I've been talking about video games online since 2006. I think 2006 is whenever I joined my very first forum, GameTrailers.com, I believe was 2006. So, I've been talking about video games online for, way over a decade. And console wars have always been there. So they ain't going away ever. But they are at a crazy fever pitch right now. There's no doubt. JCat with the poop emoji because I cussed. Thank you so much, JCat, and it's great to see you, and thank you for making me laugh. That is hilarious. I try not to curse on here. I don't curse much. I know some people might watch this at work. You don't want cuss words flying around. I know some people just don't like language, so I try to avoid it, but I get a little fired up over that. It drives me nuts when people are always combative with their audience. I can't stand it. Ramsey's here. I hope I'm saying that right. With a 5 super chat. Thank you so much. Hi, Benji. Great job as always. Thank you so much. What do you think about Bungie remaining multi-plat even after the acquisition? Yeah, that's a great question. We haven't really gone into the multi-platform aspect of this Bungie deal. It's interesting. Here is my guess. And I don't know this for a fact, but it sure looks like it reading the tea leaves. Or at least reading what's out there. It seems that Bungie having creative control and the option to go multi-platform was probably an absolute mandate by this company, right? We know from reports that they were also talking to Microsoft. I have a feeling that might have been one of the sticking points with Microsoft, why that deal didn't go through. Because keep in mind, Phil Spencer loves Destiny and he loves Bungie. So there's almost no doubt in my mind that Phil Spencer would have loved to own Bungie. My only guess here, the reason why they ended up going Sony over Microsoft, I assume, and I don't know this for a fact, but maybe Microsoft wanted future Bungie content as exclusive and have more control over it. Destiny would have always stayed fully multi-platform. I don't see that ever changing. Maybe if there's eventually a Destiny 3, but I don't actually know that there ever will be a Destiny 3. Just like there hasn't been a World of Warcraft 2. I actually think Bungie might just make Destiny 2 go forever, theoretically. The next 10 to 15 more years could still be Destiny 2. But maybe their next IP, Microsoft wanted, that to be an exclusive. Keep in mind, Bungie's a company that was under Microsoft at one point and then left Microsoft due to basically a whole bunch of creative issues, right? Where they weren't able to, at the time, really make anything but Halo. They were all on Halo. They were getting burned out on Halo, and they were able to negotiate their way out of it. And then once they went to Activision, they had all kinds of issues with Activision, where Activision trying to force sequels out, force expansions out at a certain cadence, and that also gave them a very, bad environment that they didn't like either. So I have a feeling that Bungie probably had very strong demands about an acquisition that, if they were to be acquired, needed to be met. And considering the issues they've had with being controlled in the past, I have a feeling a lot of freedom was probably part of that negotiation. Like, that was probably a hard stance Bungie wasn't willing to change on. So that's probably, here's the thing, Sony probably weighed the odds and they were like, listen, they're still demanding these sorts of things. We could just let it go. not acquire them, or we could bring them in-house, meet their demands, and we can get all of that money from Destiny. And if this next new IP is a giant success like Destiny's been, get all of that long-term revenue from that as well. And it'll help with our online offerings. So I guess they just gave into it. It's a very interesting deal. I don't know that you'll see many more of these, but yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely interesting. And I do think that they're going to remain fully multi-platform, yeah. You're seeing some people say that they specifically just mean PC and PlayStation. In this specific case, I actually don't think that's what they mean. I actually really think it's fully multi-plat. Like, I think these games are still going to go to Xbox. You never know, but I think that they're going to stay fully multi-plat. Yeah, I really do think so. Thanks for that super chat. All right, we got time for a few more questions. We got about 20 minutes. 20 minutes and then I'm out. So if I haven't gotten to your question yet, I apologize. I'm going to still hit some more, but then I have a hard out because I got to get to work. Venom Harness. Hi, do you think it'll be legally possible for Microsoft to acquire a Japanese or foreign publisher? Theoretically, it is possible. You hear some people say it's impossible for a Western company to buy a big Japanese company. That isn't technically true. However, it is very difficult. So I think it's unlikely. Never know, could be wrong, but I would say Sony has a way better chance of buying a Japanese publisher than Microsoft does because they're headquartered in Japan. They are a Japanese company. As much as they do in the West now, Sony itself is still a Japanese company. So it's going to be way easier for them to get a Japanese publisher than Microsoft. So it's not impossible. In a theoretical world it could happen, but I don't think it will. I think if anyone gets a Japanese publisher, it's Sony. Deadly 8. Sony have $14 billion left for strategic investment. They definitely can buy 2 to 3 publishers if they are playing smart. Yeah, they can. Yep. The idea that they can't buy a publisher is a myth. They absolutely can. It's just a question if they will. GT James. What publisher can you buy for $14 billion? Lots of them. Square Enix, Sega, Capcom, Ubisoft, right? How much is Ubisoft's market cap right now? Oh yeah, $6.99 billion. Absolutely, you could get them for less. So that's just a few off the top of my head. Just a few off the top of my head. Capcom, Sega, Sony. Capcom, Sega, Square Enix, Ubisoft. Those are all under $14 billion for sure. For sure. Even if you doubled their market cap, you're still getting them for less than $14 billion. GT James says that that Square and Capcom would be at the very edge of affordable with $14 billion. I actually disagree. I'd be surprised if you paid over $10 billion for Square Enix, to be honest. Very surprised. Not impossible, but I don't think so. You'd be almost doubling their market cap. Like, their market cap is still under $6 billion. It's like 5.7 we said or whatever. I mean, you double their market cap and you're basically at a little over $10 billion. Nah, I don't think they go to 14, no. I don't think so. All right. Sorry, I'm trying to find the questions here. Lots of debate and talk in chat. Antonio says, franchises aside, I don't see a Konami buy, for example. Konami makes 0 sense. I'm seeing a whole bunch of people tweeting, like, and it's getting a lot of likes. I'm confused by it. A lot of people like, Konami acquisition. Konami's essentially worthless. Like, I'm not kidding. That might sound, like, mean, but, like, if you're Sony or Microsoft, they are almost worthless to buy. Why in the world would you buy Konami? Now, the IP that they have are fairly valuable, but you could probably just license those out for way cheaper. Konami currently has almost no AAA development pipeline. So Antonio, I completely agree with you. I don't see any reason why you would buy Konami. Why in the world would you go out and spend a ton of money on Konami? Literally the only thing you're getting out of that's IP. You're not getting a talented workforce, and I'm not trying to disparage the people there. I'm just saying, like, they literally have almost no AAA output anymore. Like, you're not getting any workforce. You're not getting big studios. You're getting some IP, a lot of which are not that valuable. I mean, there's some that are really cool, but, like, again, when we're talking about big, giant transactions, is Castlevania a big, giant transaction? No. It's a nice thing to have, but it ain't a big, giant acquisition to have. Metal Gear Solid would be really nice to get out of that. Again, Silent Hill, as much as we all love Silent Hill and want it to come back, is that a big, giant acquisition? No. I have no idea why someone would buy Konami. I totally get why someone would license their IP. Like if Sony could be like, hey, we'll give you this amount of money and now we can use those IP to make games. Yeah, that I could get. But buying Konami? Why in the world would you do that? Makes no sense. Joe808. Hi, Benji. Do you think it is possible for Epic Games to acquire Embracer Group? Well, that's interesting. If so, will Epic have a chance to stand alongside Sony and Microsoft as one of the industry's biggest publishers? It's a fascinating question. I personally don't see anybody going for Embracer Group. They own so many studios, and it's so like spread out. Like Embracer has an interesting strategy in that they own a billion IP and like a billion studios, but not many that are huge, right? Whereas you're seeing like Microsoft and Sony, for example, they're going for like the big fish, right? Like the biggest IPs and the biggest studios in the world. So Embracer, as much as they are like a pub on the way up, as much as they have some valuable IP and some nice studios, I actually think not many people are going to look to acquire Embracer because I think their strategy is just very different than what other players are doing. So I have a feeling out of all the pubs out there, Embracer is pretty low odds of being acquired, personally. Brad Myers. Jeff Grubb mentioned that rising inflation is one of the reasons that there are so many acquisitions right now. Do you think that if inflation weren't higher, that there wouldn't be many acquisitions happening right now? I didn't see that Grubb said that. I think Grubb is definitely right to a degree, but I wouldn't think that that's the main driver, no. So I don't think that's the main reason, no. I think the main reason is because of, like I mentioned, Game Pass and then Sony responding. I legitimately think that's the main reason. Now, does inflation play a role? There's no doubt, right? And Jeff made a great point that the money you have in the bank right now, if you're one of these companies with billions and billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars in the bank, it's worth less a year from now with the way inflation's going. That is absolutely true, and he is spot on, and I do think that that is a motivator for acquisitions. But I don't think it's the main driving force. No. I think the main driving force is Microsoft fueling Game Pass as their future business and Sony also responding in kind. So I think that's actually the main reason. But no doubt inflation is a factor. There's no doubt. Gary Sanchez, according to Tyler McVicker, he believes that Half-Life 3 or a sequel to Half-Life is in development, and also Valve may also shift away from VR. It's possible. I've said after Half-Life Alyx happened, I definitely think another Half-Life's going to happen. They kind of got that out of the way, right? Where Valve went so long without a new Half-Life game, I think they really felt pressured, like, can we still make a Half-Life game that is like, really good, that people love? And the response to Half-Life Alyx overall was overwhelmingly positive. So I think Valve proved to themselves, yeah, we still can make a Half-Life game. So another Half-Life coming after Alex, that wouldn't surprise me in any way, Gary. Wouldn't surprise me at all to see another Half-Life. A lot of people asking about Square Enix to Sony. Yeah, I wouldn't rule that out, y'all. I really wouldn't rule that out. Gary, do you think Nintendo will go after a publisher or studio? I feel like Nintendo and Sega would be an interesting acquisition considering how they used to be rivals. You know, here's the thing. No one really talks about Nintendo with acquisitions, but that's just because they don't really have a history of it, right? Now, have they made acquisitions? Yeah, but usually Nintendo acquires like on the smaller side of things, right? I can't see Nintendo, Gary, getting into this arms race that Sony and Microsoft are in, mostly because I don't think Nintendo's business strategy is really anything like Microsoft and what Sony are doing. But I won't be surprised if we see Nintendo make a couple plays. A publisher to me seems unlikely. You never know. But I won't be surprised if Nintendo buys a company or two in the next couple of years. That wouldn't surprise me. No, it really wouldn't. Really wouldn't. GOAT status. AT&T said they're spinning off Warner Media. People are saying WB might be up for grabs. It actually doesn't really make it any more likely to be acquired than it was before. I have seen some rumblings about this. It's being spun off instead of split, but I actually don't think it really changes anything, to be honest with you. Not that somebody might not buy WB, but I think the spin-off doesn't make it any more or less likely. Oh, Antonio makes a great point about Sony acquisitions. Arc System works because of Evo. That wouldn't shock me at all, dude. Antonio, that would not shock me at all. It's a great call out. Sony getting Arc System works, I could totally see to make a fighting game for them. Wouldn't shock me at all. That's a great call out, Antonio. A great call out. Arc System works going to Sony. Keep in mind, Sony bought Evo, and we know that Sony is kind of in on fighting games. They host like the Mortal Kombat tournaments on their YouTube channel and stuff. So yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. It's a great call out, Antonio. Totally could happen. Samir, hi from India, sir. Hello to India. Hello, India. I hope you're doing well over there. Chris Jenkins, I haven't seen anyone talking about Bungie and PSVR 2, but I think they could make a Half-Life Alex level experience. I don't know that you'll see Bungie involved in VR much. They really just make online games now. Like the rumors are, is their next IP is also basically an MMO. If you look at the hirings that they're doing, if you're looking at the job listings they're doing, it looks like it's going to be a lot different than Destiny, but essentially another MMO online game. Hard for me to believe you're going to see Bungie make a VR title, to be honest with you. I don't think Bungie has any interest in making anything single player ever again. Truly. Like, I know that sounds crazy. I don't know that you'll ever see a single player game from Bungie again. I think you'll see games that you can play solo. Like, you can play Destiny solo, but you're still always online. Bungie, to me, is a fully online MMO type studio. So, while they have the talent to make a cool PSVR title, I don't know that you'll actually ever see it. T800, Benji, what about the rumor Sony's next buy will be a European company? Wouldn't surprise me. Could it be Ubisoft, CD Projekt, or who do you think is most likely? Again, like I said, CD Projekt seems like a Microsoft acquisition to me over a Sony one, given their long history of partnerships, but not impossible. Ubisoft, again, is not impossible. Ubisoft's another publisher that's in a lot of trouble right now, and I think their future output looks very yikes. So never know. Never know. All right. CMG, seems like the return on investment for Bungie's acquisition is going to rely massively on MTX, and there could be more pressure than ever to push them. Do you think that could generate backlash? CMG, in this case, I would say no, because it's already Bungie's business model. So if it was a different type of company, I would say yes, that would be. But in this case, no. In fact, even the job hirings for their new IP list free-to-play as one of the preferred job requirements. So there's a very good chance Bungie's new IP is a free-to-play multiplayer game. So in Bungie's case specifically, I would say not really, because this is what they do. They sell Eververse stuff. They sell expansions. Like Destiny itself is a free-to-play game. Their new IP is also probably a free-to-play game. So I don't see much backlash, because if you play Bungie games, you already know that's their business model. So I don't think so, at least not to like a grand scale. Put it this way, if The Last of Us Part 2's multiplayer is free-to-play, that whatever Factions 2 is, something like that will, to me, get way more backlash. If all of a sudden that's all about MTX. You saw it with Halo, right? Look at the blowback Halo got whenever, they started releasing items on the shop and they had all the MTX. Even people that love that game started yelling about microtransactions. Something like a Naughty Dog game doing that, you would see more backlash than Bungie, because that's just what Bungie already does. Randy Norman, Benji, what are your predictions for Fable? Yeah, interesting. It's been in development since summer 2017. There's lots of Rockstar and CD Projekt working on the game. Do you think we will see it this year? What will the online be? Randy, I think we see Fable this year. Yeah, I do think so. Not come out. I don't think Fable's going to come out this year. But are you finally going to see Fable this year? I think so. I mean, that would be like... Here's what I'll say. If you don't see anything from Fable this year, I think the game's in development trouble, which would surprise me considering the incredible talent at Playground. But this game has now been in development for many years. We're not talking it's been in development for a year or 2 years. It's been in development for like 4 or 5 years. If you don't even see anything from this game by the end of 2022, I would be very concerned with the development cycle. But I'm not concerned with the development cycle because I think Playground is incredibly talented and they've hired an incredible amount of talent to their studio. And you also haven't seen tons of job departures. So, yeah, I think so. I think you'll see it this year. I don't think it's coming out. I think it's going to come out next year, 2023. But I think you will see it this year, yeah. I think they'll show it probably at E3 or something, and with a 2023 release date. Kirby, Sony straight up said they wanted Bungie's tech for live services in their PS blog post. Yeah, absolutely. That was definitely part of it. There's no doubt about the tech was part of it. But it's just a part. It wasn't the only reason. There's no doubt it was not the only reason. Yeah, JCat makes a good point. CD Projekt doesn't own the IP they work on. That's the issue with them. You get a big studio in GOG, but no IP. JCat, it's a great point. The stuff they're making is Cyberpunk and Witcher. I would say it's still super attractive if the terminology in the Witcher contracts allows for that game to be exclusive. Because I think Witcher 4 is going to be gigantic. Even with how much trouble CD Projekt got in with Cyberpunk, that Witcher IP is still so valuable. Witcher Season 2 still did giant ratings on Netflix. Witcher 3 still to this day sells copies like crazy. But I would say it would really depend on that, JCat. If the contract with Witcher says that it has to be multi-platform, I would agree that their attractiveness goes down a lot. But if you were allowed to buy CD Projekt and make Witcher 4 an exclusive, ooh, that's pretty attractive. I mean, Witcher 3, isn't that over 20 million sold now? Something insane. I'm pretty sure it's over 20 million for Witcher 3. Wow, yeah, it's over 30 million. Holy Jesus. Yeah, it's like around 30 million's the estimate for which. Yeah, dude. I mean, if you can make Witcher 4 an exclusive, that's pretty freaking attractive. You're talking Witcher 3 selling around 30 million units. My lord. Yeah. But, yeah, I agree, JCat. If that game has to be multi-platform, it does lower how attractive they'd be. All right, I'm going to pull a couple questions from the bottom, and then we're out. Oh, wait, I actually have to go. 2 questions. I'm going to pull 2 questions, and we have to go. I lost track of time. I got to go. All right, 2 questions. 2 questions from people that I did not get a chance to get to. I'm sorry. Tons of stuff I wasn't able to get to today. I really apologize. 2 questions, and I have to go. I have to go to work. RD, great chat as usual. Benji, thank you so much, RD. I really appreciate that. I love doing these chats so much. Danger Man says, LOL, Microsoft could do 2 AAA games a quarter at this point. I think there will be some quarters you see that, Danger Man. Yes, I do think so. Not every quarter, but it will not shock me at all if you see that. Come on. Gotta go. Pio was in chat. Pio White Wolf, what is up, Pio? Love you, man. I think I actually got most of the questions. Danger Man, how about Capcom and Konami merging? Would kind of make sense. Jeff Keighley's tweet does not necessarily mean a buyout from a much larger company. Again, I think anyone doing anything with Konami besides licensing their IPs is somewhat unlikely because they're not an attractive company to buy. You don't get much out of it. You get some nice IP out of it, but you get like no workforce, like nothing. No studios, no workforce, barely any. So it's hard for me to see anybody doing anything. It will not shock me if someone licenses Konami's IPs. But like a merger or acquisition, I just think it's unlikely. Yo, Super Sharky, what is up? Saying, yo, Benji, what is up, Sharky? Hope you're doing good, my man. All right, one more and I'm out. I think, all right. Last one here is going to be King of the Dry Bones. I wonder if Square will sell off their Western studios as they're the studios that have had the most busts. Very possible. This is another thing we need to keep in mind. Everyone's talking about Square Enix getting acquired, which is a possibility, but there's also the possibility that Square Enix just sells their Western studios. They haven't been having much luck with those teams, unfortunately, in terms of business success, while their Japanese side has been mostly hitting home runs, to be honest with you. There was a lot of issue even with the Japanese side during like the PS3 and 360 generation, but they really turned that around on the PS4 and Xbox One generation. They've sold a ton of Japanese Square Enix games on the Switch, for example, as well. Switch has done really good for some of their releases. You saw Dragon Quest do excellent across the board. Final Fantasy VII Remake sold a ton. Final Fantasy 15 sold a ton. So that is also a possibility. King of the Dry Bones, they want to stay independent and keep their Japanese side, but maybe they sell those Western studios off. That is definitely a possibility. All right, everyone, I'm going to have to call it there. Thanks for a great chat. We had a great turnout today. Thank you for everyone that dropped super chats. I really appreciate it. Thanks for all the support. As always, y'all are amazing. Here's my spiel. Like the video if you haven't already. If you like doing these chats, helps the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe to my channel if you're not already. We do one of these every week, except for rare occasions like when I'm sick. but we'll be back next week unless something crazy happens. And I'm sure you all follow me on Twitter, but do it if you don't. All right, everybody, thanks for a great chat. Thanks for a great turnout. You're all amazing. Have a good day, a good night, wherever you are. And I will see you either on Twitter or I'll see you here on YouTube next week. Stay safe, play some games, and I'll see y'all later. All right, everybody, bye, bye, bye. See you, bye, 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 bye.